She laughed at me in front of everyone, my own wife, and not a quiet, nervous laugh, the kind that hides discomfort, but a full, head-tilted back laugh that told the room I was a joke. People turned, half smiling, half pitying, waiting for my reaction. I just stood there, staring at her, wondering when exactly the woman I married became a stranger wearing her face. If you've ever had that kind of moment, the one that burns straight through your chest but somehow leaves you calm, you'll understand what I mean when I say I stopped feeling anything that night. Before we get into what happened, hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and tell me in the comments if you've ever been humiliated by the person who was supposed to have your back. Because what I'm about to tell you, it started as a quiet dinner and ended as the loudest silence of my life. It was early December, crisp cold air, the kind that bites your face but smells like holidays. My company's annual charity gala was being held at the Belmont Hotel downtown. My wife, Julia, had spent most of the week obsessing over what to wear. Sequin dress, hair appointment, the works. I'd suggested we go simple, black suit, her favorite red dress, but she wanted to make an impression. I didn't argue. Lately, arguing with her had become like talking to a mirror that only reflected my own frustration. We arrived around 7. The lobby sparkled with garlands, golden lights, and the low hum of expensive small talk. My coworkers milled about near the open bar, laughing too loudly, pretending we weren't all there for the same reason, to look successful. Julia slipped her arm from mine the moment we walked in. "Go network," she said with a half smile. Already scanning the room for someone more interesting to talk to. I found myself chatting with Marcus from accounting about some project deadline, but my mind kept drifting toward the corner of the ballroom where Julia stood. She was talking to Thomas, our regional director, a man known for his deep pockets and shallow morals. He leaned in close, too close, whispering something that made her giggle. She touched his arm lightly, the way she used to touch mine when she wanted to distract me from a bad day. I told myself not to read into it. We were both adults. It was just conversation. Still, there was that familiar sting in my chest, the quiet voice reminding me that lately, I was the last person she wanted to laugh with. Dinner was served around 8. Round tables draped in white linen, centerpieces of winter roses, soft jazz playing from the corner stage. Julia sat across from me, next to Thomas. Every time she leaned toward him, her perfume hit me like a memory. Warm, expensive, distant. Halfway through the main course, she pulled out her phone and started typing under the table, smiling at the screen. "Who's that?" I asked gently. She didn't look up. "Work stuff. Don't be paranoid." The couple next to us exchanged awkward glances. I felt heat rise up my neck, but forced a polite smile. "Sure," I said. "Work never sleeps." Dessert came and went. By then, Julia had refilled her champagne glass 3 times. She laughed louder, leaned closer to Thomas, her hand brushing his knee like it was nothing. I kept telling myself to stay calm. Losing my temper in front of my colleagues wasn't an option. When the band started playing a slow song, I saw my chance. Maybe a dance would bridge the distance between us. Maybe for 3 minutes, we could pretend we were still on the same side. I stood, reached across the table, and said, "Come dance with me." She didn't move. "Not now, Greg. I'm talking. It's one song." She finally looked at me then, her expression dripping with irritation. "Greg, stop embarrassing yourself." A few heads turned. I froze, half bent, half humiliated. "I'm just asking my wife to dance." She laughed, sharp, cruel, deliberate. "You always have to make everything about you, don't you?" The table went quiet. Even Thomas shifted uncomfortably. I felt something inside me click, like a lock sliding into place. I straightened, smiled tightly, and said, "You're right." Then I sat back down, silent, calm. Julia rolled her eyes and went back to her conversation. Everyone else pretended to resume theirs. But while she laughed with Thomas, I watched the lights flicker across the mirrored walls and realized I'd just stopped trying. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't make a scene, but in that still moment, I started planning something I'd never dared before. The next morning, the house was quiet in that heavy way that only follows a night of public humiliation. Julia slept in, her hair tangled on the pillow, makeup still smudged from the gala. I sat downstairs at the kitchen table, staring at my untouched coffee, replaying the sound of her laugh over and over. It wasn't just laughter, it was dismissal. That moment when someone looks straight through you, not with anger, but with complete indifference. That's worse than hatred. At least hate means you still matter. I checked my phone, messages from colleagues already trickling in. Rough night, one said. Everything okay between you two? Another read. I typed and deleted 3 different replies before settling on, all good, thanks. Lies are easier to write when you've already been living them. When Julia finally came downstairs around 10, she acted like nothing had happened. Morning, she said, yawning as she scrolled through her phone. You want pancakes? I looked at her, the woman I'd shared 7 years of my life with, and realized I couldn't recognize her anymore. Do you remember last night? I asked. She blinked, pretending to think. You mean the gala? Yeah, it was fine. What? Fine. I repeated quietly. You humiliated me in front of everyone, Julia. She sighed, exasperated, like I'd just asked her to take out the trash. Greg, you're overreacting. You're too sensitive sometimes. It was a joke. A joke? I asked, leaning back. Do you even hear yourself? Oh, come on, she said, waving her hand. You looked miserable the whole night. What did you expect me to do? Sit there in silence while you sulked? I expected you to act like a wife, not a stranger flirting with my boss. That got her attention. Her eyes narrowed, cold and sharp. You're being ridiculous. Thomas and I were just talking about work. Not everything is about you, Greg. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because I'd heard that exact phrase so many times it had lost all meaning. Not everything is about you. The irony was that everything had become about her. Her job, her image, her happiness. Somewhere along the way, my presence had turned into background noise. I stood up slowly, collected my coffee mug, and said, You know what? You're right. Nothing's about me anymore. She looked up briefly, frowning. What's that supposed to mean? But I didn't answer. I went upstairs, closed the door to the home office, and started thinking. For the first time in months, my mind was cleared. AT work on Monday. People avoided me. That's how you know you've become a story. They stop asking questions because they already know the version being told. Marcus caught me by the coffee machine and muttered, Ignore the gossip, man. People talk. I nodded, pretending not to care. But I did care. Not about their whispers, but about how calmly I'd accepted them. Because the truth was, the humiliation wasn't what broke me. It was the realization that I'd grown used to it. That afternoon, I went through the company's year-end paperwork, but my mind was elsewhere. Every number I typed was a countdown. Every line of data a quiet step toward an ending. I thought about our house, the one we'd bought 5 years ago with such excitement, talking about future kids and barbecues and Sunday mornings. Now it felt like a museum of lost promises. Her side of the closet overflowing, my side shrinking each year. Her perfume on the dresser, covering the scent of what used to be us. When I got home that evening, she was on a video call, laughing again, glass of wine in hand. I walked past her to the kitchen, cooked myself dinner, ate in silence. She didn't notice. When she finally hung up, she glanced at me and said, You're awfully quiet lately. Everything okay? I looked at her for a long moment. Everything's perfect, I said, my voice steady. Exactly how you wanted it. She frowned, confused. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing, I replied, standing up. Just thinking out loud. That night, I lay in bed awake, staring at the ceiling. The house hummed softly with the sound of the refrigerator and the occasional passing car. She slept peacefully beside me, completely unaware that something inside me had shifted. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger is noisy. This was silent. Cold, deliberate, final. I thought about every small insult she'd brushed off as a joke, every dismissive glance. Every night, she'd chosen to scroll through her phone instead of asking how my day went. And then I thought about the laugh. That sharp, public dagger disguised as humor that I realized I didn't need to argue with her. I didn't need to prove anything. The best revenge doesn't come from shouting. It comes from disappearing. But I wasn't ready yet. Not quite. I needed time, precision. The next move had to be perfect, quiet, and irreversible. So I waited. I watched. I smiled when she talked about her plans for Christmas, about hosting her coworkers for a small gathering. I nodded, offered to help decorate, even agreed to pick up the catering. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that people who think they're in control never notice the silence right before the storm. By the end of that week, my plan had started to take shape, not out of vengeance, but out of clarity. I wasn't going to hurt her. I was simply going to give her exactly what she'd been asking for all along. Space. Real, endless, echoing space. The following week passed like a movie I'd already seen too many times. Same mornings, same cold coffee, same polite exchanges between two people who used to finish each other's sentences. Julia spent her evenings buried in her phone or on calls with her coworkers, her laughter echoing down the hallway like the soundtrack of someone else's life. I went to work, came home, fixed things around the house, and played my role. The quiet husband, the reliable background character. I'd been that man for too long. But this time, every motion I made had purpose. I'd already started preparing quietly and methodically. First, I rented a small storage unit on the edge of town, cash payment, no questions asked. Then I began moving things there, one box at a time, only the essentials. Old tools, a few books, my grandfather's watch, photos she'd probably never notice were missing. She was too absorbed in her phone to notice anything that didn't have a screen. One night, while she was out working late, I sat at the dining table with a notepad. I made a list: finances, accounts, documents, lease, car title, insurance, and finally, what I would leave behind. I wasn't just walking away. I was erasing my presence from her world, not out of spite, but to make sure there'd be no unfinished business, no reason for her to come looking. She'd wanted independence so badly. I was going to hand it to her on a silver platter. That Friday, Julia hosted her little holiday preview dinner for a few colleagues. She wore a dark blue dress, the one I'd bought her 2 Christmases ago, back when gifts still meant something. The house looked perfect: candles, music, wine glasses shining under warm light. I played the polite husband, greeting guests, pouring drinks, smiling when expected. Inside, though, I was somewhere else entirely. I watched her work the room, charming, confident, completely unaware that I was mentally packing our life into boxes she would never open again. During dinner, one of her coworkers, a woman named Lauren, asked how long we'd been married. Julia laughed, tilting her head dramatically. "Feels like forever, doesn't it, Greg?" The table chuckled. I forced a smile. 7 years, I said evenly. Good years, until the last few taught me some hard lessons. Julia shot me a sharp glance, her smile faltering for half a second before she recovered. "Oh, don't listen to him," she said quickly. "He's being dramatic." The others laughed again, but something in her eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. I didn't say another word. I just watched, memorizing the scene. The way she laughed too loudly, the way she clung to their attention. That night, I realized how far she'd drifted from the woman I once loved. When the guests finally left around midnight, Julia turned to me, irritated. "What was that about?" she demanded. "You embarrassed me." I stared at her, almost amused. "Did I?" "Yes, you made that weird comment at dinner. Everyone noticed." I shrugged. "I think you're projecting." Her eyes flashed. "You're impossible, Greg." She stormed off to the bedroom, heels clicking like tiny hammers on tile. I stayed in the living room, looking at the faint reflection of our tree lights in the window. It looked beautiful, calm, artificial, just like our marriage. The next morning, She left early for a team meeting. I knew better. I followed at a distance, far enough not to be seen. Her car pulled into the parking lot of a cafe across town. And then I saw him, Thomas, standing by the entrance, smiling as she approached. She touched his arm lightly before they went inside together. They sat at a corner table, laughing, leaning in close. I didn't need proof beyond that. It wasn't the first time she'd lied about work, but it was the first time I stopped caring. I snapped one photo, not to confront her, but to remind myself that I wasn't imagining things, that this was real, and that leaving wasn't running away. It was escaping. That evening, when she got home, she kissed my cheek as if nothing had happened. "Long day," she said casually. "We're closing the Johnson account, so it's been crazy." I smiled, looking directly at her. "I bet." She nodded, oblivious. "You don't mind if I take a bath and relax, right?" "Go ahead," I said softly. She disappeared upstairs. I stood there in the kitchen for a long time, listening to the water running, the faint hum of her playlist coming through the ceiling. When the house finally went quiet, I opened the drawer where we kept the important papers: marriage license, insurance forms, tax records. I took what was mine, left what was hers. I checked my private account balance. Enough to start fresh, nothing extravagant, but plenty for a clean slate. I moved the rest of my essentials into the truck that night, quietly, methodically, making sure every door closed softly, every light stayed off at 18 midnight. She came downstairs wrapped in a robe, surprised to see me awake. "You're still up?" she asked, pouring herself a glass of wine. "Couldn't sleep," I said. "Too much on my mind." "You worry too much," she said lightly. "Everything's fine." "Is it?" I asked. She looked at me, puzzled. "Of course it is. Why wouldn't it be? Just making sure we agree on what fine means," I said, smiling faintly. She shrugged and went back upstairs. When her footsteps faded, I sat at the table again. I wrote a note, just a few simple lines, nothing dramatic. I wasn't going to yell, accuse, or beg. I tried all of that before in other ways: conversations, compromises, patience. None of it mattered. People only understand loss when they experience absence. The note was short, but every word felt heavy as stone. "You said you needed space. You've got it now. Everything is yours except me." I folded it neatly and left it on the kitchen counter next to her favorite coffee mug. Before dawn, I drove to the storage unit, unloaded the last of my boxes, and sat in my truck watching the horizon shift from black to gray. It was the first sunrise I'd watched alone in years, and for the first time, it didn't feel lonely. It felt like freedom, like the quiet before something new. I didn't look back at the house. I didn't need to. That version of me had already disappeared inside those walls. The first night away from home was strange, not painful exactly, but disorienting in a way that felt almost peaceful. I checked into a modest roadside inn just outside of town, a place where nobody would think to look for me, not even by accident. The clerk didn't ask questions, just handed me the key and wished me a good night. The room smelled faintly of detergent and old air conditioning, the kind of smell that doesn't belong to anyone. I dropped my bag on the floor, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared at my hands. They didn't shake, they didn't clench, they just rested there, calm and steady, as if even they knew the storm had finally passed. I turned off my phone, disconnected from every account that linked me to her, and felt the silence settle in like a blanket. For the first time in years, I could hear my own thoughts without interruption. Morning came early, and I was awake before the sun. I walked to a nearby diner, ordered coffee and eggs, and watched the regulars shuffle in: truckers, retirees, people who lived in quiet loops of routine. It hit me that I was just another stranger now, free from the expectations of anyone who thought they knew me. While I ate, I checked my email from the diner's Wi-Fi and sent a message to my boss, taking personal leave effective immediately, details to follow. Then I wrote to a lawyer whose card I'd kept hidden in my desk for months. His name was Daniel Brewer, a calm voice I'd spoken to once before when I'd considered this possibility. It's time, I wrote. Please proceed with what we discussed. I hit send and closed the laptop. No turning back. By mid-morning, I found myself driving without a destination. The highway stretched ahead, endless and quiet, sunlight breaking through a thin layer of fog. Every mile that passed between me and that house felt like oxygen filling my lungs. I stopped by a hardware store in the next town, bought a cheap prepaid phone, and activated it under a fake name. No more joint accounts, no more shared plans, no more digital leash. I was invisible. I sent one final text to Julia's sister, Lisa, the only person I trusted to handle this with some level of empathy. Tell your sister I'm safe, I wrote. This is not revenge. This is release. She replied minutes later, a simple understood. By the time Julia woke up that morning, I was 2 counties away. I imagined her walking downstairs, expecting the same routine, the smell of coffee, the sound of my keys in the door. Instead, she'd find silence and a note. I pictured her reading it once, then again, realizing I wasn't bluffing this time. There'd be panic at first, then anger, then confusion. Maybe she'd call my phone, but the number was already deactivated. Maybe she'd check the bank accounts, but half of everything had been transferred days earlier, quietly, legally, cleanly. I didn't wish her harm. I just wanted her to experience the emptiness she'd been asking for. That afternoon, I rented a small furnished apartment month to month. Nothing special, but with a view of a narrow river that caught the light in the evenings. I bought groceries, unpacked what little I'd brought, and sat by the window watching the water. I thought about how long I'd been planning this moment without fully admitting it to myself. Every insult, every cold shoulder, every quiet dinner where she'd stared at her phone instead of me. It had been leading to this stillness. I wasn't running from her. I was returning to myself. The first call from her came 2 days later, not to me, of course, but to my lawyer. He forwarded her message. She wanted to talk, said she was confused, and that we could work things out. Daniel told her, politely, that all communication would go through him from now on. She tried again the next day, then the next. By the end of the week, she'd gone from pleading to demanding, then finally to silence. I knew her pattern. When control slipped through her fingers, she didn't apologize, she blamed. Meanwhile, I built new routines. Early walks by the river, calls with my brother who lived in Oregon, long drives with no music. I'd forgotten how peaceful boredom could be when it wasn't filled with tension. Every night, I slept a little deeper. Every morning, I woke up without the weight of walking on eggshells. Julia's world, on the other hand, was unraveling. I knew it from the emails Daniel forwarded, her confusion about the accounts, the bills, the lease. He can't just leave like this, she'd written. But I could. I had died on the 7th day. Lisa called me directly from an unknown number. I hesitated before answering. Greg, she said softly. She's a mess. I figured, I replied. She keeps calling everyone. The bank, your job, even Mom. She says you disappeared. I did, I said. On purpose. Lisa sighed. She doesn't understand. She thinks you're trying to punish her. I leaned against the window, watching the rain slide down the glass. This isn't punishment. It's a mirror. Sometimes people only see what they've done when there's no one left to do it to. Lisa was quiet for a moment. She asked me to tell you she's sorry. I smiled faintly. Then she's halfway to understanding. Days turned into weeks. I filed the divorce paperwork through Daniel, making everything as clean as possible. No alimony, no demands, no drawn-out drama. I wanted peace, not payment. When the documents were finally sent to her, she signed them within 48 hours. Maybe she still thought I'd come back if she agreed quickly. Maybe she just wanted it over. Either way, it was done. The night Daniel called to tell me it was official, I sat by the river with a small bottle of bourbon and watched the city lights flicker across the water. The air was cool, the sky clear. I thought about all the nights I'd spent sitting in that old house, trying to earn affection that had already left. It hit me how strange freedom feels when you first touch it. Quiet, almost empty, but not hollow, just spacious. Julia, meanwhile, would be adjusting to her new kind of silence. No husband to blame, no one to roll her eyes at, no one to pick up the pieces. I didn't take pleasure in that image, but I didn't pity it either. Everyone meets themselves eventually. Some just need a quieter room to hear the echo. It had been 6 months since I left, and by then the sharp edges of everything had dulled into clarity. Life had settled into a rhythm that felt almost natural. I'd moved into a better apartment closer to the city, started a new position with a construction firm that valued my work, and spent my weekends exploring places I'd never bothered to visit before. There was no drama, no tension, no waiting for the next argument to erupt over something meaningless. The quiet that used to frighten me had become the sound of peace. But peace doesn't erase the past. It simply makes it easier to see it without flinching. Every now and then I'd catch myself remembering moments that had felt normal back then. Her laughter before it turned cruel, her touch before it became distant, the way she used to fall asleep holding my hand. Then the memory would shift, and I'd see what it really was. A version of us that stopped existing long before I walked away that I hadn't heard from Julia since the divorce papers were finalized. Daniel told me she'd signed everything without hesitation, and that was that. I assumed she'd move on, maybe with Thomas, maybe alone, but either way, it wasn't my concern anymore. Still, one evening in early summer, as I was leaving work, I saw a familiar car parked across the street. My old car, the one she'd insisted on keeping. Julia sat behind the wheel, looking out toward the building. For a second, I thought about pretending not to notice, but our eyes met before I could turn away. She got out slowly, hesitating like she wasn't sure if I'd even acknowledge her. "Greg," she said softly when she reached me. Her voice had changed, smaller somehow, careful. "Can we talk?" I studied her for a moment. She looked different. Thinner, tired, the kind of exhaustion that comes from more than just lack of sleep. "About what?" I asked. "About everything," she said. "About what happened." I sighed. "There's nothing left to talk about, Julia. Everything's been said." She shook her head. "No, it hasn't. You disappeared. You left me without a word." "I left a note," I said. "You just didn't believe I meant it." Her eyes welled up, but I could see the frustration still burning beneath them. "You blindsided me. I thought we were just having a rough patch." "A rough patch?" I repeated quietly. "Julia, you spent years pushing me away. That night at the gala was just the moment everyone else finally saw what I'd been living with." She looked down, twisting her fingers together. "I was stupid," she said. "I didn't realize how bad it had gotten. I thought you'd always be there." I nodded slowly. "That was your first mistake. You thought love meant permanence, that no matter how cold you became, I'd stay just to prove something. But love isn't endurance, Julia. It's choice. And you stopped choosing me long before I stopped showing up." She tried to meet my eyes again. "I've changed. I've been seeing someone, a counselor. I'm working on things." "That's good," I said sincerely. "I hope it helps. Can we at least have coffee? Just to talk? As friends." I almost laughed, not cruelly but in disbelief. "Julia, we were never friends. We were partners once, then strangers living under the same roof. I don't hate you, but I don't have room in my life to go backward." She looked like she wanted to argue, but the words never came. Instead, she nodded, tears spilling quietly. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry," she whispered. "For all of it." I let the silence stretch for a moment before answering. "Apology accepted," I said gently. "But it changes nothing." She looked away, wiping her cheeks. "I know," she said. "I just needed to hear it from you." I didn't respond. She stood there for another moment, then turned back toward her car. As she drove off, I realized I didn't feel the satisfaction I thought I might. There was no triumph in watching her drive away, just a quiet understanding that sometimes closure isn't a conversation. It's the moment you realize you no longer need one. That night, I met with Rachel, the woman I'd been seeing for a few months. We sat on the patio of a small Italian restaurant. The kind of place with warm lights and lazy music drifting through open windows. She asked how my day was, and I told her honestly. Ran into my ex, I said. She raised an eyebrow. How did that go? I smiled faintly, peacefully, which is something I couldn't have imagined before. Rachel nodded thoughtfully. You seem lighter lately, she said. Like you finally put something down. I looked at her across the candlelight, realizing she was right. I did, I said. A life that wasn't mine anymore. She reached across the table, took my hand, and said quietly, then don't ever pick it back up. We finished dinner, walked by the river afterward, and when she laughed, it wasn't forced. It wasn't a weapon. It was just laughter, simple and kind. I didn't realize how much I'd missed that sound until then. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine a future that wasn't built around fixing something broken, but creating something new. Weeks passed, and I occasionally heard through mutual acquaintances that Julia had moved out of the city, took a smaller job, maybe even started over. Good for her, I thought. Everyone deserves a second chance, just not always with the same person. As for me, I learned to enjoy the smallest things, the smell of fresh coffee in the morning, the hum of construction sites where progress replaced decay, the quiet evenings that used to feel like punishment but now felt like reward. One Sunday morning, I sat on my balcony with Rachel, watching the sunlight catch the edge of the river. She leaned her head on my shoulder and said, "Do you ever miss it? The old life?" I thought about it for a long moment before answering. No, I said finally. You can't miss something that ended long before you noticed. You can only be grateful that it's over. She smiled, understanding. Looking out at the water, I realized how everything had come full circle. The laughter, the humiliation, the escape, it all led here, to this quiet balance. Julia had wanted space, and she got it. Miles of it, years of it, enough to last a lifetime. I got peace, and in the end, that's the better trade. Sometimes walking away isn't weakness. It's the bravest thing you'll ever do. Sometimes silence really is louder than any apology. That if you've listened this far, thank you. Subscribe, hit that like button, and tell me in the comments, have you ever reached the point where leaving was the only way to be free? Because sometimes the best revenge is simply never needing to look back.